It started as an ordinary afternoon history class, the kind where I struggled to keep my eyes open. We were halfway through a dull video on ancient trade routes when the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, this is a school lockdown. This is not a drill," came the principal's tense voice. For a second, the class froze in disbelief. Then the lights went off as Mr. Hill, our teacher, hurried to lock the door and motioned for us to huddle in the corner behind the lab bench. My heart thumped as I crouched under the supply table with my friend Jenna. In the sudden darkness, I could barely make out the shapes of my classmates pressed against walls and under desks. Someone stifled a whimper. "Is this really happening?" I wondered, biting my lip. Lockdown drills were routine, but the quiver in Principal Owens's voice sounded all wrong. The silence that followed was heavier than I'd ever felt, broken only by our own shallow breathing. In that silence, every little sound was amplified. I could hear the tick of the wall clock and the rustle of fabric as Jenna trembled beside me. Mr. Hill was crouched by the door, one hand on the door handle, the other holding his phone with unsteady fingers as he texted the front office for information. No response came. The faint glow of his screen was the only light, casting strange shadows on the walls. Each minute that crept by felt like 10. Then, faintly at first, came the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They weren't the brisk, confident steps of a police officer or teacher, but a slow, dragging shuffle. Scrape, tap, scrape, tap. The uneven steps halted right outside our door. I held my breath, ears straining. Jenna gripped my arm, her nails digging in. Through the gap at the bottom of the door, I saw a shadow, 2 feet standing just beyond the threshold. Something was off. The shape of the shadow wasn't quite human. The feet looked distorted, as if whoever or whatever was out there had joints bending the wrong way. A soft knock came at the door, not a frantic pounding, but a gentle, deliberate tap. The doorknob rattled lightly, as though someone was testing it. "Let me in," whispered a hushed, sing-song voice on the other side. It sounded like a little girl. "It's cold. Let me in." My blood turned to ice. There were no young children in our high school. I heard one of my classmates begin to softly sob in terror. Mr. Hill remained motionless, adhering to protocol not to open the door. He pressed his weight against it, jaw clenched, determined to keep it shut. The whispering stopped, and for a long moment none of us dared to move or even breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shadow under the door shifted, and those slow footsteps resumed, shuffling away down the hall. We all exchanged wide-eyed glances in the dark. I could faintly see the reflection of Jenna's eyes, shining with tears. I wanted to whisper some comfort, but I didn't trust my voice not to shake. A sudden muffled scream from somewhere else in the school made us all jump. It sounded distant, maybe from the floor above or the far end of the east corridor. A short, sharp cry cut off abruptly. My stomach flipped. We had no way of knowing what was happening outside our room, and imagination was our worst enemy. Was there really an intruder? Who was that whispering girl? Nothing made sense. Mr. Hill's face was barely visible in the dark, but I saw his silhouette stiffen with resolve. Another noise echoed from the hallway. A low scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the tiles. He cursed under his breath. "Stay put and stay quiet," he whispered to us. "I'm going to check on that." Before anyone could protest, he quietly slid the metal bookshelf away from the classroom door and eased the door open a crack. The hallway beyond was dim. The only illumination came from the pale blue glow of an emergency light farther down the hall. "Mr. Hill, don't," I breathed, but he shot us a reassuring, if shaky, look. Then he slipped out, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, we were in complete darkness and silence again. The class sat rigid, processing the fact that our teacher, our adult protector, was now gone. A girl in the corner started sobbing outright, the sound muffled by her palms pressed to her face. No one shushed her. We were all on the verge of tears. I reached for Jenna's hand and squeezed it, and she squeezed back just as hard. We waited. 1 minute. 2. Each second stretched painfully. There were faint noises filtering in through the door. A thud, a scraping scuffle, then a choking gasp. I didn't know if it was Mr. Hill or or something else. Panic rose in my chest like bile. He should be back by now. When the door slammed open, crashing against the wall, a few of my classmates screamed. Standing in the doorway was not Mr. Hill, but a tall, impossibly thin silhouette. It was pure darkness in the shape of a person, almost blending into the unlit hall behind it. Two pinpricks of pale light where its eyes should be caught the faint blue glow from the hallway. In one long-fingered hand, it held something small and rectangular. My stomach churned when I realized it was clutching Mr. Hill's phone, and dangling from those same spindly fingers were his keys, jingling softly. Both were smeared with something dark. The figure lurched into the room with impossible speed. Chaos erupted. Desks scraped as people scrambled backward, knocking into each other in a blind panic. I heard a gurgling cry from the front of the room. Someone must have been caught by that thing. I didn't dare look. I was frozen in place until Jenna seized my arm, yanking me from my paralysis. She was already pulling me toward the back exit door that connected to the adjoining science lab. We bolted for that door as behind us, the creature let out a hissing snarl. I heard the door frame splinter with a sickening crack as it slammed into something, or someone. I didn't turn around to find out. Jenna shoved the lab door open and we burst through, fleeing our classroom and the horror that had invaded it. We stumbled through the science lab next door, nearly tripping over stools and lab equipment in our haste. In seconds, we emerged into the main hallway of the school. The corridor was washed in a dim, eerie blue light. The overhead fluorescents had switched to emergency power. Some flickered weakly, others were completely dead. Lockers lined the walls like rows of silent sentries, and scattered papers littered the floor. At the far end of the hall, the red glow of an exit sign cast jittery shadows. The school, usually loud and bustling, felt like a tomb. We ran, our frantic footsteps echoing through the empty corridor. Somewhere behind us, I could hear distant crashes and an inhuman screech that made my blood run cold. It spurred us to sprint even faster. Where is everyone else? I wondered wildly. Other classes should have been locked down too, yet every door we passed stood open, every room dark and deserted. A few lockers hung ajar, contents spilled out as if their owners had vanished in the middle of grabbing their things. The whole school seemed deserted. Jenna tugged on my arm and pointed wordlessly to the floor ahead. I followed her gaze and felt a surge of nausea. A trail of dark liquid, nearly black under the bluish light, smeared across the tiles and led around a corner toward the main office. Blood. My throat tightened, and I forced down the urge to gag. We slowed our pace, and I quietly lifted a heavy fire extinguisher off its wall bracket as we passed. It was the only thing that felt even vaguely like a weapon in my trembling hands. Stepping carefully, we followed the smeared blood trail. Each footfall felt like a dare. The air was growing colder with every step. I could see our breaths fogging faintly in front of us. My whole body trembled, both from the chill and from terror. This didn't feel real. It felt like I had stepped into one of those horror movies Jenna and I loved to watch. Except, now, we were the prey. Near the main office, the blood trail disappeared under a set of double doors. One of the doors was slightly ajar, a faint amber light seeping through the gap. I hesitated. That was the way toward the school lobby and front entrance. If we could reach the lobby, maybe we could escape outside, or find help. But to get there, we'd have to pass through whatever scene lay beyond those half-open doors. Suddenly, from the shadows behind the receptionist's desk, a figure staggered out into the hallway. Jenna raised the tiny flashlight on her keychain, and we both nearly cried out in relief. It was another student, a senior named Marcus. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his left arm hung oddly at his side. But he was alive. His face was ashen with terror. "Marcus," I whispered. He immediately gestured frantically for us to be quiet, his eyes wide. "It's out there," he panted almost inaudibly. I saw it. It took Mrs. Lopez." Mrs. Lopez was our vice principal. Marcus looked on the verge of shock, breathing hard and shaking. Before we could question him further, a tremendous crash came from just beyond the lobby doors, followed by an inhuman shriek of rage. The sound was so loud it rattled the trophy case against the wall. Glass awards clinked together inside. We all flinched, hearts hammering. Marcus took a step back. "Run," he mouthed, his lips barely forming the word. Without another sound, he turned and bolted down a side hallway toward the library, clutching his injured arm. Not a second later, the double doors to the lobby burst wide open with a bang, as if kicked by a mule. I caught a glimpse of it in the stuttering emergency light. The same gaunt silhouette, now at the far end of the corridor behind us. Its head snapped in our direction, and even from here I could sense those pale pinprick eyes locking onto us. Malice radiated from the creature in almost palpable waves. Jenna didn't need any prompting. She grabbed my hand, and we sprinted after Marcus toward the library, fear propelling us faster than I thought possible. Another ear-splitting screech echoed down the hall, and the thunder of something inhumanly fast barreling after us filled my ears. We veered into the library door just as that dark shape hurtled around the corner. Inside, the library was a cavern of shadows. Rows of bookshelves created corridors of darkness, and the normally cozy reading area now felt full of lurking threats. The only light was the faint glow of a single emergency lamp above the checkout counter. We dashed between shelves and crouched low behind a row of encyclopedia volumes, trying to make ourselves small and invisible. I clamped a hand over my mouth, struggling to steady my breathing. The metallic taste of fear was on my tongue. For a long moment, the only sound was our ragged breathing. Then, somewhere in the darkness, a soft scraping sound, like a shoe scuffing against the carpet, made us both freeze. My body went rigid. The creature was in here with us, stalking among the bookshelves. We stayed utterly still, pressed together behind the shelf. I could hear Jenna's breath hitching in quiet sobs against my shoulder. Slowly, that soft scrape moved deeper into the library. In the gloom between the stacks, I caught a flicker of movement, a tall shadow passing one of the gaps between shelves about 10 feet away. My breath caught in my throat. It was searching for us. I gently touched Jenna's arm and pointed toward the rear emergency exit door of the library, which was barely visible in the dark. We started inching in that direction, careful not to make a sound. If we could slip out into the courtyard, maybe we could lose this thing. But even as I thought it, my heart sank. I could make out the glint of a chain threaded through the crash bar handles. The door was padlocked shut, probably to prevent student pranks. We were trapped. From somewhere in the darkness came a new sound, a soft sobbing. It was the unmistakable cry of a young girl, echoing faintly through the library's silence. Jenna's grip on my sleeve tightened. The crying sounded sorrowful and afraid. It might have been the most human sound we'd heard since this nightmare began. Jenna leaned close to my ear, her lips trembling. "Maybe someone else is hiding in here," she breathed, so quiet I could barely hear her. The sobbing continued, each hiccuping cry tugging at my heart. Could it be a classmate? Perhaps someone injured or scared, alone in the dark. We exchanged a pained, conflicted look. Against all my instincts, Jenna stepped out from behind our shelf. I scrambled up right beside her, not willing to let her go alone. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice quavering. It's okay. We're students too. If you can hear me, come toward the sound of my voice." The crying persisted for a second, sounding no closer. Jenna took a cautious step forward between the towering bookshelves, pulling me with her. "Where are you?" she whispered. "We can help you." Abruptly, the sobbing stopped. The silence that fell was more terrifying than the crying, as if the air itself was holding its breath. In the pit of my stomach, I knew we had made a mistake. We stood there, exposed between the shelves, hearts pounding in unison, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Out of nowhere, a different voice spoke from the darkness, so close it was almost at my shoulder. "Got you." The words were cold and filled with cruel glee. A figure burst from behind a nearby bookshelf. It was the monster. It had been the one sobbing, mimicking a frightened girl's cries to draw us out. Now, it was mere feet away, lunging at us with impossible speed. In the split second of its approach, I saw its full form, tall and thin, limbs too long, clothed in tattered fabric that looked like a shredded old-school uniform. Its head lolled to the side at a disturbing angle, as if its neck were broken. Those awful white eyes blazed with hunger. "Run!" I shrieked, shoving Jenna hard toward the library's main doors. She stumbled forward as the creature's clawed hand swept out. I felt a whoosh of air as those fingers narrowly missed snagging my shirt. We sprinted for the door we'd entered from, but with a snarl the creature recovered and sprang after us. There was a blur of motion, and a cold, vice-like grip clamped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I hit the carpeted floor face down with a painful thud, the wind knocked from my lungs. My chin smacked against the ground, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. Behind me, Jenna skidded to a halt when she realized I'd been caught. "No! Keep running!" I wheezed desperately, but Jenna hesitated, torn between fleeing and helping me. The creature's grip was like iron. I could feel icy claws through the fabric of my jeans as it began to drag me backward into the darkness. I kicked wildly with my free leg, managing to connect with something solid. The monster hissed, a skin-crawling, inhuman sound, but didn't loosen its hold. With a determined cry, Jenna snatched up the fire extinguisher I had dropped. She charged at the creature and swung with all her might. Wham! The extinguisher struck the creature's arm, producing a crunch that echoed through the library. The monster recoiled with an ear-splitting screech, releasing my ankle. Its form flickered and distorted in the shadows, as if the blow had disrupted whatever held it together. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline overriding pain. "Come on!" Jenna yelled, grabbing my arm. We ran again, limping and stumbling, but we'd only made it a few steps when the creature reappeared in front of us in a blur of unnatural speed. I skidded to a stop, nearly crashing into its tall form. It let out a guttural growl and swung an arm. The back of its clawed hand struck Jenna square in the chest. The force lifted her off her feet and sent her flying across the room. She slammed into a bookshelf with a sickening thud and collapsed to the floor, the heavy extinguisher clattering away into darkness. A strangled scream tore from my throat. "Jenna!" I raced to her side, nearly tripping in my haste. She was crumpled against the base of the bookshelf, gasping in pain. Even in the dim light, I could see the agony on her face. I slipped an arm under her shoulders, trying to help her sit up. She was alive, but her breaths came shallow and ragged. The creature was on us again, closing in relentlessly. It loomed over the two of us, towering and almost brushing the ceiling. Now that it was this close, bathed in the faint red glow of an exit sign, I could see it clearly. And what I saw made my blood run cold. The thing had a human-like form, but it was all wrong. Its limbs were emaciated and bent at odd angles, and it wore what remained of a faded navy blue school uniform, the kind I'd seen in old yearbook photos from the 1950s. Its head was cocked to one side where the neck appeared broken, yet it moved with frightening strength. Worst of all was its face. Or rather, the lack of one. Its features were blurred, indistinct, like a smudge on a mirror, except for the eyes. Those pale, milky eyes bulged unblinkingly, fixed on us with unmistakable hatred. A twisted grin slowly stretched across what should have been its mouth. The jaw opened far too wide, unhinging with an audible crack. A gurgling chuckle bubbled up from its throat, a grotesque mockery of laughter that raised every hair on my body. I clutched Jenna to me and tried to push both of us back, but we were already against the bookshelf. We had nowhere to go. The creature leaned down, and a skeletal hand shot forward, closing around Jenna's throat. She choked, hands flying up to claw uselessly at the vice-like fingers lifting her off the ground. Desperation drowned out my fear. With a surge of adrenaline, I leapt up and grabbed hold of the creature's arm, trying to pry its hand off Jenna. Its skin was ice cold and felt wrong, like touching solid smoke. It barely budged under my grip. It was like trying to move a statue. Jenna's heels were kicking weakly a few inches off the floor, her face turning red as she struggled for air. My eyes darted wildly, searching for anything. A weapon, a distraction. On the wall just a few feet behind the creature was a red fire alarm pull station. My mind flashed to something I'd learned during safety drills. In a fire alarm, doors unlock and alarms blare. Maybe, just maybe, I could trigger a distraction, or even an escape route. I didn't think twice. I lunged around the creature, releasing its arm and diving for that alarm with everything I had. The creature, startled by my sudden move, loosened its grip on Jenna and swiped at me with its free hand. Those claws raked across my shoulder, white-hot pain searing through me, but I didn't stop. With a scream of effort, I threw my weight against the alarm lever and yanked it down. For one breathless heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the alarm system erupted with a whooping clang and blinding strobe lights. The library was flooded with flashing red light and an ear-splitting bell. I dropped to the floor, covering my ears, and saw the creature reel back from Jenna, its hands flying up to its faceless face as if in agony. The shrill noise echoed through the halls, painfully loud, and the monster writhed as though each burst of sound was a blow. Jenna collapsed to the floor, coughing and gulping in air. The creature stumbled away from us, clearly disoriented by the cacophony. This was our chance. Ignoring the burning pain in my shoulder, I grabbed Jenna by the arm. "Come on!" I shouted over the alarm. Half dragging, half carrying her, I bolted for the library's main doors. Out in the corridor, the red strobe lights pulsed like a heartbeat, illuminating the chaos in jarring snapshots. The fire alarm had indeed unlocked all the secured doors. I heard the click of the main entrance unlocking nearby. Supporting Jenna, I staggered toward the lobby. The main doors were ajar, likely forced open by the arriving police. Beyond them, I could see flashing blue and red lights in the night and dark uniformed figures moving with guns drawn. Behind us, a furious shriek cut through the alarm's din. The creature had recovered enough to realize its prey was escaping. I refused to look back. Summoning the last reserves of my strength, I hauled Jenna through the lobby. Together, we shoved open the heavy glass double doors and stumbled out into the cool night air. We had made it out. Outside, a half-dozen police cars and fire engines were parked haphazardly, red and blue lights painting the school's facade in garish colors. A crowd of students and teachers, those who had escaped or been rescued from other parts of the school, huddled behind the emergency vehicles. The moment Jenna and I emerged, several officers sprinted toward us. One of them grabbed hold of Jenna, taking her weight from me, while another pulled me gently away from the building. "It's okay. You're safe now," one of them was saying, but I barely heard him. My legs finally gave out and I collapsed onto the grass, gasping. My entire body was shaking violently, the adrenaline ebbing and leaving cold dread and shock in its wake. Jenna was lying a few feet away, and I saw paramedics immediately surround her, lifting her onto a gurney. She was alive. I saw her raise a trembling hand as if reaching for me, and I knew she was trying to tell me she'd be all right. Only then did I let myself stop and breathe. We were safe. Everything after that was a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and questions. Paramedics wrapped me in a blanket and tended to the bleeding scratches on my shoulder and the bruise on my chin. They told me Jenna was going to be okay. A few cracked ribs and maybe a concussion, but nothing life-threatening. I nearly broke down in tears of relief. The police bombarded me with urgent inquiries. What happened? Where was the attacker? I tried to explain as best I could, but how could I make them understand? I mumbled something about a person or thing inside the school, but it all sounded absurd. I'm not sure they believed me, especially once they checked the security cameras and found nothing but static and flickering shadows on the footage. At some point, they found Mr. Hill alive, though injured and dazed, in the stairwell. Other students from my class were found huddled in a locked supply closet. They had managed to hide and barricade themselves after we fled. Aside from cuts and bruises and sheer terror, everyone was all right. Vice Principal Lopez, however, was nowhere to be found. When I finally saw my parents rushing toward me beyond the police tape, I ran to them and collapsed in their arms, sobbing. I hadn't cried once during the whole ordeal, but seeing them broke the dam. I could hear my mom's voice cracking as she held me, and even my dad's grip trembled on my shoulders. An hour later, I sat in the back of an ambulance beside Jenna. She was awake, bandaged and propped up on pillows, holding my hand tightly. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We just exchanged a look that said, "Can you believe we survived that?" And what even was that thing? None of the adults milling around had answers for us. The intruder was simply gone. Vanished. A couple of officers muttered theories about a prank or mass hysteria. Jenna and I knew better. What we saw would haunt us forever. Before the ambulance took us to the hospital for a final check, I found myself glancing back at the dark school building one last time. Most of the lights were off now, and the halls beyond the glass doors were in shadow. It looked so ordinary, and yet I knew it hid secrets in its silence. In an upstairs window, just for an instant, I thought I saw a pale face peering out, eyes gleaming faintly in the darkness. My breath caught and I blinked, and the face was gone, leaving only emptiness. A chill crept down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. As the ambulance doors closed, I remembered something from freshman year, an old black and white class photograph hanging in the hallway from decades ago. There was a girl in that photo with a solemn face and a navy blue uniform, standing a little apart from the others. I had heard whispers of a tragedy, a fire during a school lockdown drill in the 1950s that took the lives of a teacher and a student who remained trapped inside. We never paid those rumors much mind. Now, with that memory sending ice through my veins, I wondered if that lost student had been the thing we faced, a vengeful ghost kept restless by terror and pain. I squeezed Jenna's hand as the ambulance pulled away, closing my eyes against the spinning red lights. I don't know if I really saw a face in the window just then, or if my traumatized mind conjured it. But as we drove off, I silently prayed that whatever haunted those halls had finally found peace, because I knew I would never forget the sound of that whispering voice at the door, begging to be let in. It would echo in my nightmares for a long, long time.